In Parashat Va'era, Moshe says the famous line that he is aral sfatayim, that he is of uncircumcised lips. And in the previous Parsha, he said, I am not a man of words, rather I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. In both cases, what Moshe is saying to God is that he is not qualified for the job of being the emissary of God. He doesn't feel like the right person. He doesn't feel up to it, to going into Mitzrayim and speaking to Pharaoh and the elders of Israel and taking the Israelites out. One of the early Hasidic masters, Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, looked at this moment and saw of Moshe's, and he saw something of himself in Moshe, which is at this moment Moshe is wrestling with low self-esteem. In order to begin this teaching that Menachem Mendel gives us about low self-esteem and the way it hinders us from speaking holy words and taking on the role of being the emissary of God, Menachem Mendel begins with the book of Genesis in the creation story, when God breathes the breath of life into the nostrils of the human being. And in this way, the Torah says that the human being becomes a nefesh chaya, a living soul. The Aramaic tradition, the Aramaic oral tradition, was recorded as understanding this line as God breathes the nishmat kol chai, the breath of all life, onto the human being, and that breath became within the human being a speaking spirit. Menachem Mendel reminds us that when we speak, we're using the breath, and the breath is connected to the same creative force that fills the entire universe. We use the breath to move our vocal cords, and then through the whole process of using our mouth and all the systems of language and grammar, etc., we bring words into the world. When we do that, using the breath of God, the nishmat kol chai, we are, just as in the creation story, creating worlds. Menachem Mendel says we are creating new heavens and a new earth. In fact, even when you are not intending to create worlds, you are. Just by virtue of the fact that we are using the nishmat kol chai, the breath of all life, Menachem Mendel says we're creating no matter what. If we are really conscious of the fact that we are using something so holy as our breath to speak, and we are conscious of the fact that our words create worlds, we would probably become much more careful about the world that we are creating. We would want to create a world that we want to live in and that we want our children to live in and our children's children to live in. But what hinders us is when we think of the awesome responsibility that we are taking on in using the breath of life to create worlds. What hinders us is a low self-esteem. Like Moshe, we don't think we're good enough to take on that responsibility. There is this hair's breadth between the quality of humility, which is a quality that Moshe is said to also have possessed. The Torah says he was the most humble person on earth. Kind of an ironic thing for the Torah written by Moshe himself to say about Moshe. But here we also have Moshe struggling with his own self-esteem, which also happens many times in the Torah. The lack of self-esteem can manifest itself in many different interesting ways. But ultimately what happens when you are thinking of yourself, when you're communicating, you are thinking about how your speech is going to benefit you. Are people going to think I'm clever? Are people going to think I am powerful, etc.? And God keeps reminding Moshe, this is not about you. I've chosen you to be the servant, my servant. I'm going to tell you what to say. It's not about you. When we make it about us, it fundamentally changes the worlds that we want to create. We want to create worlds that benefit us. Menachem Mendel reminds us of this incredible and dark story in the Talmud. Rabbi Eliezer has been excommunicated by his peers and by the rabbis. On his deathbed, his students and former colleagues come to visit him, including Rabbi Akiva. Eliezer reminds Akiva of a time when they were walking on the road together, and Akiva asked Eliezer to show him, using sorcery, how would you create a whole field of cucumbers? And Eliezer mutters this spell, and poof, a whole field filled with cucumbers. That's wonderful, Eliezer, but now how do I harvest all these cucumbers? And Eliezer mutters another spell, and all the cucumbers are gathered into a pile. But just moments before his death, Eliezer foretells of Rabbi Akiva's horrible death, where he was tortured at the hands of the Romans, and says essentially that his horrible unnatural death is going to come about because of the worlds that Rabbi Akiva created in his words. And he used this story of the cucumbers as an example. So no matter what, even when we don't intend this to be the case, our words create worlds. So Menachem Mendel himself talks about the difference. What's the difference between when you're speaking with the humility that's necessary to understand that you're speaking with the Nishmat Kol Chai, and when you are suffering from poor self-esteem or thinking too much about yourself? And again, the difference with self-esteem is that you're concerned about what the benefit is for you. Humility, on the other hand, is an openness, it's a vulnerability, it's a porousness, wherein you become concerned about the dignity of those who you are speaking to. And Menachem Mendel takes this one step further, actually, and says, you are also concerned about the dignity of the Creator. By doing this, you end up ennobling and giving dignity to all the parties involved in a conversation. We all wrestle with this line between self-esteem and humility. Menachem Mendel himself was no less caught up in this struggle. Sometimes self-esteem shows up as a kind of chutzpah, and there's a story about Menachem Mendel going to visit an elder rabbi, one of the great masters of his time, and he shows up at the rabbi's house uninvited with no hat, no belt, a long fancy pipe, and silver-buckled shoes. When he leaves, the students of this tremendous rabbi see this as sort of being disrespectful to the rabbi. And they say to him, what is with this chutzpahdik youth who shows up with no hat and no belt and these silver-buckled shoes and a long pipe? The rabbi responds, there once was a king who took their most precious gem and hid it in a pile of cinders and ashes, knowing that no one would go looking for his most precious gem in a pile of cinders and ashes. That's not where you put such a precious thing. The rabbi said, what can I tell you? Menachem Mendel takes his tremendous humility and buries it in the cinders and ashes of his own vanity. Famously, Menachem Mendel also signed many of his letters from "He who is truly humble." One of the Rizhiner Rebbe's students asked him, how could he be so absurd? How can someone call themselves he who is truly humble? Remember, that's also what Moshe says of himself. Moshe also calls himself the most humble person on earth. So the Rizhiner Rebbe replied to his student, Menachem Mendel is so humble that he no longer considers it a virtue. It reminds me of another Hasidic Rebbe who said, listen, even my humility isn't worth mentioning. Menachem Mendel also was famous for saying, I am no better than a worm. In fact, I'm sure that a worm is better than me because a worm only does the will of its creator and never destroys anything. In any case, despite his personal struggles with his own self-esteem and with the quality of humility, when Menachem Mendel gave over Torah, when he spoke words of Torah, he did so with this tremendous love and concern for the people he was trying to reach. So he gave over teachings like this one wherein he shows how concerned he is about how self-esteem hinders people from living up to their true potential. One of the beautiful stories about him is that after he had died, one of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's came into his Beit Midrash and found many of his students at night telling stories of the Hasidic masters by candlelight. All the candles were burning low and many had already gone out. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe came in, he found them telling stories of Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk. No, everyone stop, he says, everyone stop. When you tell stories of Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, all the candles must be burning. All the candles must be burning, because when Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk spoke, he spoke out of love for the other. He spoke out of true humility, and because he did that, nothing bad could touch him. His own self-esteem couldn't touch him when he was giving over words of Torah. So when you speak of Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk and you tell stories about him, you must light all the candles, especially at night, just as if you were studying Torah. And I thought, we should all be so blessed to be remembered like that.